folks. My name is Girish, the host for Back to Basics, another Back to Basics for another week. We are talking to a person that I have interviewed on season one, and we have talked about cocktails and how cocktails work and what's the differences on bartending and mixologist. And today we're gonna talk to him about coffee and cocktails and how different tastes are there and what does it do to make it very, very vibrant when it comes to cocktails and coffee at the same time. And is there a difference between a mixed roast and dark roast? And we'll get into all that detailed stuff. So let's call Abbas again into Back to Basics for the second time. And he's a returning champion from season one. So Abbas, how are you? And thanks for coming to Back to Basics.
Hey, thank you so much, Girish. That was great. It's good to be back, of course. And before we continue, I would love to do this for you. Welcome back to basics. All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Um, Before we get into the details of the show, you might have the same answer from last time, but what does Back to Basic mean to you for season two?
So season two, I'm so excited for season two, to be honest, Girish. And back to basics really means exact same thing. Don't forget your roots. Know where you started from. Know who you started with, and be a support system to people who supported you in your initial days, right? So that is what back to basics is to me, to be honest. So, yeah.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you again for being on the show for the second time. The first time we did, it was just only audio, and now I finally see you on video. So this will be also on YouTube and some other
Yeah.
handlings that we'll be doing too. So thank you again for being on the show. So let's
Thank you.
start from the basics, if you don't mind. Is uh, people who have not listened to the first episode from season one, what is the difference between a mixologist and a bartender?
So realistically, the difference between a mixologist and a bartender is that a bartender is expert making the drink, right? But a mixologist is an expert curating that particular drink, which a bartender makes it on a regular basis and perfects it. So that it's like comparing an executive chef with a DCDP, maybe a CDP, a chef de partie.
Hmm.
So there's a fine line between a mixologist and a bartender. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Thank you again, Abbas, for answering that question. Because some people they have a mixed definition between mixologist and a bartender, and they think that it's the same thing, but it's actually not. And with your definition, that kind of helped to define the two. So today we're going to talk about coffee cocktail. Does
mhm.
coffee taste different when it's different roast? For example, the medium roast or the dark roast or any other roast. I don't know. You tell me if there's any other roast out there.
Yeah. So roast is basically it's just roasting, right? So whether you roast a light roast or whether do you medium roast or whether do you do a dark roast, it depends up to the profiling of that particular bean, whether the bean is washed or whether the bean is unwashed. You know, so every bean will have its own every varietal, in fact, or the estate where the coffee is coming from, the plantation will have its own flavoring, have its own notes, have its own charm, right?
Mm,
And that depends on how you roast it. For example, if there is an unwashed bean, right? Green bean, green coffee bean. What I mean is, you take the cherry, you sun dry it, and you have the unwashed, the coffee bean. And then when you roast it, right? If you roast it dark, it's going to be that one dark chocolatey taste, right? Because you're roasting it dark, so the natural fruit, the natural sweetness which is stuck onto that particular bean it gets dead, right? So you rather want to do a light roast or a medium roast for that particular bean. So when you're really tasting the cuppa, you get the notes of that fruitiness, of that, flavoring, that caramel. So yeah, that's really the difference between the dark roast and mild roast. If you take a washed bean, right, a washed coffee bean, and you roast it at a certain temperature, right, that will have the roast profiling, which will be more towards the dark end. So you'll have, well, depending where your beans are coming from. So you'll have things like cinnamon, you'll have dark chocolate, you would have caramel and dark caramel. What I mean, yeah, you'll have very dark profiling with that,
Yeah, thank you so
with
much.
dark roast, obviously.
Thank you so much,
Mm,
Abbas, for answering that question. But let me ask you this, right? If we go to a bar, any bar, right, and then we say that
mhm,
we need, let's say, a coffee martini, right? Is that
mhm.
automatically understood that it's a medium roast or a dark roast, or do we have to specify that? Or it really depends on the
So,
bar, which
uh-huh.
beans they use?
This is exactly where the mixologist comes in place. So this is the job of the mixologist to have clearly mentioned if he's writing an espresso martini or a coffee martini with the recipe that he's created, he needs to write down sort of beans that he is actually using,
Hmm.
right? Generally, for an espresso martini, you would use something like a dark roast.
Hmm.
Reason being is that the dark roast will have, more, dark flavors. Will have more a bitter note, bitter flavor, and that bitterness of the coffee will basically be um, that bitterness of the coffee will be the main component of that particular drink because you want coffee, right?
Hmm.
And then when that coffee is mixed with alcohol, right, it does not cut through the acidity of that particular espresso. Rather, it complements it depending on what spirit you're putting, what alcohol you're putting, right? So, but if you take something like a light roast coffee, right, now the main component of that particular coffee, let's say for example it's an unwashed bean and it's light roast specialty coffee, has flavors of fruits and maybe mandarin and some oranges and floral and blossom, and that's the flavor notes and profiling that a particular bean has. If you pull an espresso shot out of that and create a cocktail by adding alcohol, the notes will die.
Hmm.
The notes will die because your spirits are already overpowering,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And you won't get the notes of the flavor. Yes, you will get the coffee taste, but you won't get the notes when you mix it with alcohol because alcohol is already an acidic drink or a spirit, right? So that's really the difference between both.
Well, thank you so much, Abbas, for explaining that because I would not know actually, and people like you should explain it to people like us when we do order martinis or even Irish coffee or even any other classic coffee drinks out there. So let's go to Irish coffee if you don't mind. So Irish coffee, I think if I'm not mistaken, we put whipped cream on top, right? But is there a reason for that reason? I mean, why do we have to mellow down with the whipped cream? Is it too strong when it comes to Irish coffee, or what are the thought processes on that?
So again, so it really depends how you make your Irish coffee and who's making your Irish coffee. The whipped cream really is not to mellow down the flavor.
Mm,
The whipped cream is just adding a component, the texture, the thickness, the velvety feel, the leather feel on your tongue and your palate. That's the reason why you have whipped cream on top, because you're already having coffee, you're already having your Irish whiskey to it, right? And then you have your other ingredients. You have your milk, but just that is not enough, right? So you want something smooth on your palate. You want something creamy, something velvety, something foamy. That's the reason why you put whipped cream on top. But again, there are certain people who, instead of putting whipped cream, they use whiskey infused whipped cream. So
mm,
a whipped cream. which has whiskey infused, right? So when you put that, it's really just for the taste and the palate, right? So it is an important component in that particular cocktail, and it's not something to dilute the drink.
So, can you explain the infused part of the whiskey? So, if a person wants to do it at home, what would you recommend?
No, so just take heavy cream, right? Just take heavy whipping cream,
Mm-hmm.
put it in a mesh bowl, and so what it depends on how much whipped cream you want to make. So if it was me, generally I would do half a liter, 500 ml of the whipping cream liquid that you get in market. I would put maybe 60 ml of no before putting 60 ml, I would whip it. You know, with the whisk, I would just whisk it so hard that I get a really nice, foamy, thick leather texture, right?
Mm-hmm.
After that's done, I will take 60 ml of whiskey, Irish whiskey, preferably, and I'll put it in that particular foam that I've already created, which is the whipped cream.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would just subtly blend in my whiskey with it. I would not whisk again because that might kill the milk solids. So I would just slowly, I would just mix it with a spatula, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So the whiskey is so overpowering, and the foam that you've created already has micro bubbles, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the flavors would pass out really easily. And you
Mm-hmm.
can make that at home. And once you blend it with your spatula, take a spoon, just dig it in and pop it off on the coffee that you want.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you again for explaining that. So, obviously coffee is a little, strong for a lot of different people, and what they do is they try to put a little milk and a little sugar in there to get
Hmm.
the strongness out of there, right? So
Hmm.
all this Irish coffees and other martinis, do you think that they add a little sugar to blend that down, or does the alcohol kind of blends it right in? Is that the right question? Do you understand what I'm saying there?
So, sugar is just a sweetener. There's a lot of people out in the market who do not like bitter coffee.
Hmm.
They like sweet coffee. There are a lot of people who like coffee with milk and sugar. There are a lot of people who like just coffee and milk. There are a lot of people who like just coffee by itself,
Hmm.
and coffee has different brewing method. So you have AeroPress, you have V60 pour over, you have siphon, you have French press, you have mocha pots, you have espressos. So these are different type of coffee which we talk about just coffee in our next episode, obviously, in the future. But however, with these, right, these are different types of brewing methods. All of them have different flavor profiling, different taste to your palate. All of them will may or may not go with sugar.
Hmm.
All of them may or may not go with milk.
Hmm.
There's because there are certain brewing methods. We are brewing the coffee,
Hmm.
and coffee does not really require milk. It's just a tradition, or people just drink it out of that taste, and it's been happening. It's commercial. People do it,
Hmm.
right? Because you do not want to caffeinate yourself so much that you're just you're a zombie. So because of that, people generally tend to put milk and dilute their coffee,
Hmm.
with milk because obviously it tastes better. But people do not like milk. They would put water instead, whether it's hot water or cold water. You have cold brews as well.
Hmm.
Now, it depends on the consumer if they like sugar or not. If they like sugar, they go for it. If they don't like sugar, it's not necessary.
Hmm.
Sugar does not really affect the component of the coffee. Sugar only enhances the flavor. It
Hmm.
only changes the flavor of that particular drink. You're adding sweetness. That's it. You remove the sweetness, it's there. It's the person who's diabetic can also consume that coffee.
Of course,
So
of course,
sugar is just an additional component, that's all,
of
which
course.
is another flavor that you're adding. It's as good as adding a flavoring like vanilla shot or caramel shot or cinnamon shot or hazelnut shot. Similarly, simple syrup is sugar, right? So it's just adding another flavor to your coffee or
Okay.
your cocktail for that matter.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. I'm gonna go and ask about the espresso, but one last question about coffee, if that's okay.
No
Now,
problem.
um, we have seen coffee martinis, we have seen Irish coffees, right?
Mhm.
Uh, but if we if we take coffee and mix it with beer or any other item, do you think it reacts very differently? Has that happened, or what are your thoughts on that?
So, um, so I've worked in the coffee industry, and I still do, and I also am a mixologist, so I do experiment a lot with coffee and cocktail and alcohol, to be honest. So I do know a lot of breweries, microbreweries, a lot of brew masters, right, who brew beer. They're actually brewing coffee beer. So when they are brewing that beer, they actually buy coffee from us and they master their recipe and then they brew at a large scale. But if you are asking me whether we can put espresso shot or a coffee shot on top of a beer, maybe not. It may not taste really good because coffee is bitter, right? Espresso shot it comes out at a certain pressure point. You know, the water pressure, the temperature of the water, you know, the amount of grind, the coffee powder which is inside the portafilter,
Hmm.
that also plays an important role. How much espresso shot you're pulling? A standard shot is 30 ml. If you put 30 ml of espresso, which is a concentrate, into a 300 ml or a pint of beer, obviously your whole flavor is changing. It depends what sort of beer you're having. So if you're having a beer like Guinness or maybe a stout beer, right? Coffee would complement it because that coffee is an espresso pull shot. It is already concentrated, it is already bitter, it already is fresh, and it already has that acidity and that sweetness too, for that matter. When you add that to your dark beer, it will complement it because that dark beer has a very similar profiling, not the same. It has a dark profiling in terms of your palate, in terms of your taste,
Mm.
right? But if you put that same espresso in your lager or a cider, it may not really taste that good. That's what I feel.
Mm.
But you're more than happy to try it at home and let me know too, because
Of
that's
course.
something definitely I wouldn't try at home.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you. Thank you again for explaining that. So, regarding espresso, can you just explain espresso is just like another coffee, or can we buy another bag of espresso, or is it a different infused way of from a coffee to an espresso?
Mm.
Explain that to me if you don't mind.
So espresso is just a machine, not Nespresso. Nespresso is basically a capsule, dude. It's a capsule that you put into a machine, you shut it in, and then you press the button, water goes down, and the coffee comes out. That's a different type of coffee that it pulls out an espresso shot, but it is not as good as a proper espresso machine. There are machines like La Marzocco, Astoria, San Remo. You know, these machines are so good, right? That they are proper espresso machines. So really, an espresso coffee is your roasted beans. You grind, so you from medium coarse to fine coarse. That's how you grind your. You gotta check it when you pull your calibration shot. So you grind the coffee beans. You put it in the portafilter. You level it up. You tamp it at a certain pressure. I usually do it at 20 kilos of pressure, and then after just cleaning the top off of it, I put it back into the espresso machine. Now, depending on your espresso machine, what is the cylindrical power? How much is your water pressure, right? It has to be adjusted, right? Which a technician would do it on the spot over there before installing the machine. And you need to have regular services. That's a separate thing. Now, when you put your portafilter inside, you press your single shot button, espresso will come out. So that espresso coming out, that really is nothing but your water pressure at a certain temperature. going into your portafilter, running through that coffee, okay, creating that pressure on the coffee. And because of that pressure, the coffee has no other space but to come out from the portafilter. And that's how an espresso shot is pulled out.
Mm,
And that is your concentrated espresso. The beans are the same that
mm,
you can use for your French press.
mm,
It's the grind size. It's about how fine you grind your coffee bean,
mm,
right? So
mm,
you the more finer you grind your coffee bean, the stronger the espresso shot gets. It's more easy to burn your coffee shot or your espresso shot if the grind size is too fine, right? Because the pressure built in the espresso machine is trying to run through the grinds, trying to run through the coffee powder inside your portafilter. But because it is too fine, it does not find enough space to come out of your portafilter. The
mm,
water, when it pushes down with the pressure, is still finding, little spaces to come outside. It's
mm,
finding the espresso to come outside. But because there's very limited space for the water to come out of your portafilter, the coffee is already burned because of the temperature of the water and the
what?
pressure already pressuring on the portafilter. So
Mm,
that is the difference. So your coffee powder needs to be at the right grind size to pull out a great espresso. Usually in one single shot, around 8.5 grams of coffee is needed. And for a double shot, times by two. So that is really an espresso.
yeah, yeah. Thank you again for explaining that because a lot of people they don't know what work goes in when it comes to espressos. So thank you again for explaining that. Now, what I've asked
Problem.
you about coffee and the whipped cream and martini and
Hmm.
all the other stuff and
Yeah.
sugar and all that stuff, if we take that same question
Mhm.
to the espresso, is that the same answer or does it work a little differently?
Um, I might not have understood your question actually. Could you please repeat that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You know, when I talked about the whipped cream, the sugar, the milk, and the
Yes.
martini and how it reacts,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
Hmm.
If you take that same example
Hmm.
for an espresso, do you think it works the same way or is it works a little differently?
It works the same way. So if you keep your espresso out exposed to the outside air, the espresso will change its taste over the period of time. Every 20 seconds or every 10 seconds, the taste is going to change because the temperature, okay, the temperature of the espresso is still hot. It's at around 70 degrees Celsius when it comes out, according to me. My espresso machine does that. But when once every single second that you waste, the temperature is decreasing, 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 and the taste and the flavor profiling will also change. And after some time, if you still do not consume that espresso or use that espresso in a particular drink, it it's getting exposed to the outside environment, right? It's getting exposed to oxygen, it's getting exposed to nitrogen in the air, you know, and that will change automatically changes the taste of your espresso. So
Mm.
the minute you pull out your espresso, you're supposed to consume it right then and there. Consume it meaning you should not gulp it, obviously, because it's going to
Ah,
be
go
hot.
for it.
But you gotta start drinking your espresso because, or else it's gonna change the taste. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you again for explaining that. So it's kind of the same thing. So thank you again. So we've talked about many different aspects when it comes to coffee and espresso and how it mixes and how it doesn't mix and all that stuff, right? Now, if you take the same similar questions, but if you add a fruit peel, like for example, orange peel, uh, do you think it reacts a little differently, or that's just a cosmetic thing right above the coffee? So what are your thoughts on that? Can we infuse certain things into into the coffee ground or anything?
Yes, of course. So this actually comes before your roasting stage.
Okay.
When you have your green beans, right?
Mm,
There are a lot of people who infuse their green beans with in a whiskey barrel. They leave their green beans into a wine barrel, for a while. They infuse it, they pull it out, strain it, dry it, and then they light roast it, right? That really gives you the flavoring of, or the notes, or the hint of that whiskey, of that wine, of that particular spirit that the beans are actually sitting in. For example, my previous company that I worked for, which was Dope Coffees, we had a coffee varietal called Double Barrel, and that was whiskey infused double barrel, right? So the beans were actually infused, and then they were dried, and then they were light roasted, right? So after the roasting is done, when you smell that beautiful coffee, it smells absolutely amazing. And when you pull maybe a French press out of it, or maybe a V60 pour over out of that particular varietal of bean that dope produces, the moment you drink it, you know, it feels like, oh, you having this. Where am I tasting this whiskey from? And I'm tasting this coffee, right? And it's just a complete different experience, and you have to experience the whiskey washed coffees and wine washed coffees, and these are the ones which basically taste kind of like alcohol, which is non-alcoholic, but you get your coffee as well. Now, after pulling out your espresso or your particular drink, and then if you add anything to it, it may not blend well because it's already a concentrate, right?
Mm,
Adding anything to a concentrate, or you're adding another concentrate to it, it may not gauge the flavor. So
mm,
if you take, for example, an orange peel has essential oils
mm,
on the skin of the orange. So the moment you squeeze your orange peel on top of that coffee, okay, outside, not inside out, but like outside, the orange bit going out,
mm,
and the white pith facing the other way, and you're just, squeezing out the oil on top of the espresso, you are not going to taste that orange, but your nose will smell that orange, because that orange peel has more stronger essential oil, which is more of an essence,
mm,
natural essence, which you're spraying on that coffee. And when you take that shot and you keep it close to your mouth, the first thing is going to touches your nose, right? So you're going to smell orange, and you're going to be like, oh, this smells a little weird, right? You're smelling an orange, and the moment you taste it, you do not taste an orange.
mm, mm.
It's just there, and that is your nose noting.
Yeah,
That's not really a flavor profiling, but that's just your nose palate.
yes. Thank you again for explaining that. But is there any particular fruit that we use, or just orange only? Are there other fruits that we can use?
For what?
For
For
the
garnish?
for the garnish, yeah.
For coffee cocktail or just coffee?
Coffee cocktail in general.
So, a coffee cocktail in general for garnishes, I usually use like three pieces of maybe coffee bean of where I've pulled my espresso shot from, of the same varietal of coffee.
Mhm.
I would put, shavings of dark chocolate. I would put shavings of different types of chocolates. I would put shaving of a nutmeg. I would put maybe, peel of an orange. I could put peel of a pomelo. I could put a lot of things you can just do. It really depends on the bartender and the mixologist as to
Mhm.
how they want to curate their own drink, and what are the components inside that particular cocktail. If it's a cream based, you do not want any floral thing to go on, or any fruity thing to go on it, because it's already cream based. You're trying to produce something which is coffee, alcohol, and cream. You want to put something along those lines, so there will be chocolate, maybe nutmeg, or sometimes maybe I've done a cocktail with, a bit of red chili, fresh red chili, just a
Nice.
very thin shave of it, and just drop it down like it's as thin as a thread,
Mm.
and just drop it down like an X on top of my cocktail, but which had a component of chili. It was a chili, it was a spiced espresso basically that I had done. So it really depends on the drink, to be honest.
Okay, awesome, awesome. Thank you again, Abbas, for
Yeah,
explaining that. Now,
right.
one last thing, if you don't mind, before we leave the
Please.
show today.
Yeah.
Coffee cocktail. is it considered more of a summer drink or a winter drink? Obviously, by default, we use this for winter, but I've seen a lot of people taking that during the summer also. So explain the thought process on that.
So coffee can be consumed in two ways: hot or cold, or lukewarm. You know, it can be consumed either hot, either cold. There is a new trend called cold brew, right? Cold brew is another type of a brewing method, right? When you get your cold brew concentrate, there are a lot of places. For example, in India, we have a chain of bar called Socials, right? Which is owned by Mr. Razumlani, and that place will have this drink called cold brew and tonic, cold brew lemonade. They'll have different types of cold brew. There is a mixologist called Nilesh Patel in Bombay, in India. He has created a drink which is cold brew um, gin and tonic. So it really depends what sort of weather you're out there with. So in summer, I would have this really nice cold brew with lots of ice in it. I've got my coffee. I can have a splash of gin in it, or maybe I can have splash of tequila and bit of lemon lime squeeze to it, and I can have a bit of jaggery syrup to it. Shake it with the spirit. I can enjoy it in the summer. In winters, whereas I can have something warm, I can have, maybe something like a warm Spanish latte, or I can have a Mexican latte. Um, you know, you can even have a warm cocktail, right? If you can have warm toddy, which is a hot cocktail, you can add coffee to that as well and create something. So definitely, coffee cocktails can be consumed during winters and during summers and during rainy season and during the spring as well.
Wow, we cover all seasons. It looks like when it comes to coffee
Absolutely.
cocktails. So yeah, thank you again for that, and thanks for explaining that.
Thank
And
you.
I think it was kind of understood, but there's just too many options when it comes to coffee cocktails, and
Absolutely.
I think people they get the perception that when you have coffee cocktail, it's usually during the winter because it makes you warm and makes you cozy, but obviously during the summer you have proven that there are other cocktails out there that it could be cold. And now you also did mention about
Absolutely.
having a cold beer coffee also. So I think that that also explains that.
Cold brew,
Cold
not
blue.
a
No, no,
cold
no,
beer.
no.
It's cold
But we
brew.
have talked about the beer too earlier today.
Oh yeah, the coffee beer. Yeah, the coffee stout.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you again for that. And cold brew and
All right.
is crazy. Abbas, one last question, if you don't mind. Any last words before you leave from Back to Basics? And it's definitely an honor for you to be on the show. And it's I've asked you questions numerous times about different stuff that I've talked about offline, obviously. So, what are your thoughts? Any last words?
I would really appreciate if people start appreciating good coffee. Just no to instant coffee. Start having really nice, good coffee, specialty coffee, and I really want the viewers to know more about what specialty coffee is, right? Because specialty coffee basically, is a term used for coffee which is scored over 80 80 points on a 100-point chart the scale by the SCAA, which is a Specialty Coffee Association of America. So yeah, I really want people to explore the world of coffee. Once they explore, I want them to relate that with alcohol. Alcohol and coffee goes hand to hand, and I would be more than proud to say this that it does. If somebody denies it, I'm sorry, it goes for me. So I love creating drinks with coffee and alcohol. However, however, specialty coffee can also be consumed by itself. It is brilliant. Learn more about coffee, learn more about cocktail, make it at home, create a good vibe. Let's change the whole culture, is what I'm trying to say. Instead of having a, regular Long Island iced tea at the beach, you can have cold brew iced tea at the beach. So you have your vodka, you have your gin, tequila, rum. You have your triple sec, which is an orange liqueur, or contra. You can have a bit of lime juice, a bit of jaggery syrup, a bit of cold brew shaken, topping up with some soda with loads of ice to it. That drink will give you some energy. You know why? Because it has caffeine, because it has lime, because it has jaggery, because it has alcohol. And it's not always about Red Bull or any other energy drink that you go outside in the summer, or you're having an energy drink just because you want to get hyper. No, try have cold brew instead. It will give you energy. It may not give you wings, but it will definitely give you energy. And my suggestion, my favorite coffee of all time that I have tasted in my life is this small roastery in India called Dope. And I only drink Dope coffees because they're just too dope for me. But yeah,
Okay.
that's it for me, Girish.
Yeah, thank you so much, Abbas, for being here and giving me all the details about coffee. And there's some few things that I've actually learned, and I'm pretty sure others have definitely learned also with your input. So thank you again, and hopefully we'll see each other again on Back to Basics. Hopefully we'll make it happen. So thank you again, and God bless.
Thank you so much, Girish, sir.
Thank you. So, guys, we spoke with Abbas
Bye.
today, and we talked about the basics of coffee and the basics of cocktail coffee, that is. And we talked about that coffee is just not for coffee when we are just having bagels. It's actually making fun with drinks and cocktails and beers and, all the other stuff like martinis that he's mentioned. And there's a difference between, as I said, a different roast, a medium and a dark roast, and he explained that. So as usual, as always, there's a quote of the day from Back to Basics, and here's the quote of the day from Back to Basics. The quote is, "If it weren't for coffee, I'll have no identified personality, whatever." So guys, as usual, what do I always say at the end of the episode? Guys, everything in life goes back to basics, and that's what we did today, guys. Guys, you take care. God bless. Keep on commenting as much as you can on this episode. Good, bad, or ugly, either way, it'll make my show stronger. And if we like this episode, we might have Abbas back again onto this episode, a different topic on Mixologist. And guys, remember, take care, God bless, and keep on commenting as much as you can, because there are three things this makes this show a hit, which is the content, the guest, and definitely the host. Guys, take care, God bless, and I will see you next week. Abbas, you like it? Next week's episode on Back to Basics.
What is going on? Like, why is all this stuff happening? So that was my introduction into Wall Street. Then I moved on to the bond side where I work now, and we see very similar type of actions. So what I noticed is, especially over the past couple of years, because the market structure has changed in the investment markets, where I was brought up in this valuation type of framework, meaning you value a company. It's very, it's very financial statement oriented. You try and figure out how much a company is going to make in earnings, whatever your favorite earnings metric is, and then based on that, there you apply what's called a multiple, right? So it's earnings times some multiple, and that would determine your price. And you could do this in that. Stocks are probably the easiest way of understanding that. So I'll stick that. But what has happened kind of in that post financial crisis period is the valuation of stocks have gone up exponentially. Right? They're no longer, we're in like a totally different regime. And you got to ask, well, why? Like why is everything expensive? Why are so few things cheap? And if you waited investing on the valuations alone, you would have made, you would have underperformed